Hey parents, welcome back. Another edition of Teenager Tuesday, Parent Podcast Tuesday
Yeah.
with Cory. Hey Cory, welcome back again.
Man, excited to be here.
Yeah, part 2 of Tips with Cory. That's what we're calling this.
Sure,
right?
yeah. I mean, essentially we were just discussing like some good value reminders as you're going throughout this parenting journey. What are some good value reminders to just kind of keep at the center focus?
Yeah.
And so first one, we talked about transformed lives, just living on display and just being hyper aware of that. And the next one would just be kind of this idea of like maybe the value and importance of having some faith family traditions.
Yeah.
I don't know about, but as you know, growing up, and maybe you as well, and I think a lot of families, like they have like some holiday traditions, like, hey, we always go to our grandparents, or funny enough, longer story, you can laugh at me, but when I was 12, like my aunts and uncles had like this initiation into like the Burchard family, like my last name, and it was kind of fun, kind of weird, but
What was it?
all types of stuff, man. Like I had to stand on the street and like with a sign that said like honk, like all type, like I mean it was
Honk
like,
for what? Just the word honk?
just to get 10 honks, and that was part of the challenge.
Okay.
Like, you know, like just random stuff.
But you remember that.
But I remember it was a core memory that I remember, and it was like I'm now a Burchard member kind of thing. You know, so
that's
like
cool.
But we see these values of traditions, and if we look through even like the Bible, like God's people had these traditions he had them do as reminders and as like making memories and as actually holding to. And now you see feasts and festivals and pilgrimages and Sabbath and all these things. And though Jesus has fulfilled those, right? Like we're not like required to have to do these pieces, but they're still beneficial. Like there's still benefits to it. And so one of the things is just as a family, I would encourage, and that we see ourselves do as well, is like create a few family faith traditions within your family that's around the things of God that you can have scheduled pretty periodically or regulatory as you think it sees fit. And it's something your kids will remember even after they're out of your house.
Oh, yeah.
Man, those were moments and memories I have around the things of God as a family. And maybe those things will continue to carry on. And so some simple ones would be, like, is there a weekly prayer time where you sit as a family and pray together? Like, is there a weekly dinner you do? And it's, hey, all technologies aside, and we're just going to ask, like, how God's working in your life this week. And sometimes we think the things of faith are like, they have to be profound. But really, it's like the simple things consistently done over time for God continues to cultivate the heart of God inside of us, right? And so communion as a family has been like a huge thing for us, where like we sit down with our kids, and every so often we're doing communion as a family. And even after that, we did communion at the church like a couple weeks ago, and my boys 8 and 10 went off and did communion together. Not because I encouraged, not because I said, cool. But because they've had it modeled, like they've seen the impact of it. And so
there's a cool, I don't know if you know this about this area, and maybe it's the same where you are, but around Valentine's Day, it's a big thing in the area to have like a daddy-daughter dance.
Okay, that's a tradition.
However, there's an aging out of that too in our area. So it's kind of like as parents, like as they age up, the tradition, like hopefully a tradition from year to year doesn't go away, but maybe just looks different as they age up.
Yeah, I think the best question we asked and then wanted to sit with is, what do I want our kids to remember about God in our house? And then how do we create events, moments, and things around that? So if I want them to remember that, like, man, praying is important. Okay, rather than just maybe daily or when they need it or when something comes up, but can we create like moments around that that they remember? Like, what else do we want them to know? We want them to know that, like, the sufficiency of the cross. Like, okay, well, let's do communion as part of our family. Like, let's make that a tradition. What do we, that they can, like, kid you not, like you walk with Jesus. So we're gonna do some family walks where we like just kind of decompress things. And so the thing probably isn't as important as just the why behind the thing. But I would encourage you to like think through, like, as a couple or as a family, or even get your kids involved. Like, what are a few things we can do as a family, like that may be a faith tradition that we can do recurringly? And allow that to be a consistent part of maybe our faith. And you see it's through those things that those things are passed down. Like your kids will remember that. There's a reason.
And they could take it into
like
their
think
families.
of Christmas, right? Like some families are like, we do stockings first in our family. Like, or we do gifts first. Or we do, it's breakfast before everything. Right? Like there's an order in which you do it. And it's just because you inherently grew up doing that. So I would encourage, if we see that in the things of like culture, like how much more profound can it have in the things of our own faith,
it'll take that in. And I do want to get to the next one too. Which I know you're very passionate about, and man, you do so well too, as a person and in your family, is the training part of it. Talk about that value.
Yeah, I think I realized early on with parenting that like I wanted to protect my kids. Like I wanted to protect them from the world. I wanted to protect them from like bullying or any issue going on. I want to protect them from whatever it may be, right? Like that's inherently in our core, is like we want to protect, right? Our kids, right? Like you've got a young daughter now. Everything's like protection mode, for sure. Not a chance, right? But I started to realize also like my job isn't just to protect. My job is also to prepare, right? Like I've got to prepare them to be able to actually live functionally,
which protects them.
You
prepare a teenager to drive.
Correct.
And as we prepare them to drive, hopefully they drive well, which protects them from the other dangerous things on the road.
And you don't start teaching them how to drive as soon as they're ready to drive. You're building trust in their story. All the way up to when you get to the point of driving. It's like, hey, the tool's different now, but the value has been intrinsically built in the whole entire time. So really the clearest story maybe in the Bible we can see of this is like Jacob and Esau. Like when it's like he sold his whole entire birthright because he couldn't make a bowl of soup. You know, like it's like, was he not taught that? Was someone not like...
Patience.
Right, like was his mom not giving... Like, I don't know. Like, and there's a lot in there. And that's like one simple pullout from it. It's not even about that. But it is crazy to think like how much struggle will our kids maybe have because they just weren't prepared for the things that we could have brought to them.
Which is a two-way road. If we present opportunity to prepare, and they have to respond also.
For sure.
But are we presenting that and intentional about that?
Absolutely. Yeah. And then realizing that if kids can learn algebra and like how to drive, right? Like we're entrusting them with debit cards as teenagers. If they can learn how to do a job, right? Like if they learn for sports teams, like, hey, here's all the requirements for the team. Like they can learn the things of God.
Oh yeah.
Like for sure. Right. And so I would say training is like discipleship with an end in mind, you know, at the end of the day. Like what do I want my kids to be able to know and do when it comes to God? And how do I build those things in for them, right? And so how many conversations I have with parents, and it's the purest of heart, where it's like, we want our kids to get baptized. Can you talk to them about baptism? And I'm like, I know your heart. That's great. But then I always go, I want you to talk to them about baptism. And let us help you know how to. But this is a training prepare moment that you get to do.
Well, and something I want to make sure that you talk about, because I love this. You do this as a family. You do this with your boys. You kind of have this, not really word of the year. What would you call it?
It's kind of like the value of the year. Like an intensive
talk
thought.
About that.
So I've got 2 boys. And so with that, like I realize it's my responsibility for them to grow up as men of God with the best that I can, right? Like never can take will and free choice away from a kid, right? But you can help them understand that their choices do have consequence, right or wrong, right? And so, but just something I began relatively recently, but it's already been really fun is, and this is super practical, is there's a few things that I want them to know by the time they hit 18. I remember when my kid hit 9, I went, he's halfway done from having to listen to me. Like once he hits 18, he doesn't have to listen to me anymore. Though I hope he still wants to, right? Like, but it just kind of like expedited this thought of like, what do I want him to know before he gets out of my house? Like, what has God entrusted me with? And so there's a word that God is just kind of centered on that I'm going to work them through until they're out of the house a little bit. And
the word really just backs up like the value.
Right?
Like so trust.
So this one's trust. Like this whole year working through my 10-year-old and just trust. And it's simple. It's like, how do we become trustworthy people? What does trusting Jesus really mean? What does it look like when trust is broken? And how can we, like, how do you bring forgiveness into the story? And what does it look like to be trusted in the home? Like, how can I entrust you with more stuff? Like, simple, like, moving them into a debit card now for a kid thing, just to learn a little bit about, like, what does it mean to do chores and work towards that? And a lot of it is like, I didn't get this growing up, like as a kid. And so I'm a little proactive, maybe over top, but I'm seeing like when it's not a legalistic thought of we have to do these things, but it's like out of the genuine heart of like, I just want to prepare them well.
Yeah.
Then God gives you the grace to use every tool to help do that. And so we're working through this idea of trust. And in that, I'm entrusting him to even plan maybe a family tradition. Like, hey, you do a Devo night this night. You know, like you do a prayer starter this night. And so, and I would say one of the biggest things to train them with, and we just talked about this last night, is like serve together as a family.
Oh, yeah.
Like in some aspect, whatever that looks like. Like the quicker a kid's faith goes from like something just head and heart, but actually into hands, like the more connected they are to the actual body of Christ.
Yeah. Well, and parents, if you're listening to this and you're like, man, I just started kind of tuning into this stuff, or man, it's something I've been meaning to get around to and I haven't. My youngest is now a sophomore in high school. Others are graduated. One of my favorite sayings is an old proverb that says, the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago, but the second best time is
right
today.
Now. Yeah.
And so don't feel like, if you kind of get this sense, I should have done this sooner or whatever, don't should yourself to death.
No.
Instead say, all right, the second best time is today.
Yeah.
So I can do this now.
And even with time, like I've really come to understand that like God is the owner of time.
Yeah.
And so with that, like he can interject at any part of story.
Yeah.
So even if you're like, man, I wish we would have done this 5 years ago. Like God has all the time in the world to be able to give the grace for what he wants to do. And he can actually go back in time and redeem and heal and move and do things. And so I would say that the perfect time is now. And don't think big. Just think the question like, man, what do I wish I would have known about faith until I was 18?
Yeah.
Or what do I want them to know about faith before they're 18? And then just practically maybe integrate some of those things. And will it take, some sacrifice? Absolutely,
Always.
but it's so worth it, right? And I think one of the dangers is like this spiritual bypassing of just hoping and wishful thinking that things will turn into a result that we hope.
Yeah.
And that's just not reality.
Yeah.
Right.
We have hope for eternity. We can have action for now.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
for sure.
Yeah. Well, Cory, this has been awesome. Thank you for joining us for the last 3 episodes. It's been fire. If you didn't listen to the culture update, go listen to that.
Yeah.
Thank you for being with us, man. I appreciate it so much.
Yeah.
Seriously, love you, value you adding value, and just value our friendship, man.
Yeah,
so
I think last thing I would say for parents is like get yourself around other parents that want the same values that you have for your kids.
Yeah.
And I know like community is one of those things we hear a lot, but the quicker we realize that like though we have to follow Jesus for ourselves or by ourselves, we don't have to do it alone. And it's better when we don't do it alone. So like surround yourself with other parents that maybe want to engage in some of these same things and encourage each other to keep going with it. So
And if you need help getting connected with other parents, we have the parent Facebook page. We have groups online. There's a groups pastor at every campus. So we'd love to help you out. As always, parents, this is a good reminder. You can do this. You're not alone. You are not alone. You don't have to be alone. God is with you, and so are we. Have a great week.